Okay, so I've been getting a fair few questions on my videos lately over the last two videos I've posted. One being the baritone video, and the other one being just the little guitar thing I posted about how I make my guitar tones and how I sort of go about everything. So this session is for that baritone demo that I did for the playthrough with the P90 pickups. So process is pretty similar between like both sort of P90s or humbuckers or whatever. It's just sort of listening and applying EQ where I feel like it needs to go. I'll just play through this first little section here and solo through some of the parts that are all going on so you can hear everything in context. And then I'll sort of break down the processing for the guitar. Cool. So that's a bit of everything going on. So this is what the DI for the guitar sounds like with all of the processing turned off. So this is tuned to a drop D, an octave down from like a regular drop D tuning. Baritone does it super well, great tension. I've had no real like stability issues tuning this low. So there's no actual effects on the individual channels. It's these are all besides this pitch. There's one section in the song that goes back up to F, and I didn't want to retune the guitar, so this was just easier. But it's just a tuner and this, which I don't even use. So this is my processing for this guitar. There was just a couple plugins I wasn't using. Another tuner, G-Tune, goated. I used some EQ before the amp. This looks pretty drastic, but I'll explain what I'm doing. Then that goes into X50. And then, using gate and the overdrive in X50 into the head. Then I'm bypassing the cabinet part and using GGD Cali cabs with I think there's a Catharsis IR in here as like a user one. And then a bit of post EQ, and it's not doing a whole lot, just a little bit of carving and just, not too much. And then that's going into a bus with L1 on it, just to basically pin the volume, and that's pretty much it. So I'll sort of go through every part, and switch it on and off so you can sort of see what it's all doing. So I'll start with the DI. Pretty spanky. And then this is the EQ that I've applied to the DI. So there's a pretty drastic mid scoop at about 200 hertz here. A lot of this 200 hertz is where a lot of the mud I find comes from in guitar tones. And I find if you pull it out before the guitar amp, it doesn't get cloudy and muddy and cleans up before it actually goes into the amp. And then the amp sort of naturally adds that to the overall spectrum by compressing and distorting everything. But then it's not overbearing and it just cleans up the whole tone. This is just boosting a little bit of pick attack, and then this is just like a full low shelf from 168 down, basically just adding some just sustain to the tone. So I'll turn this on and off so you can hear what it's doing. I'll start with it off and then I'll turn it back on. Sorry, I had all the effects off. Let's try that again. So. So you can probably hear it's adding a fair bit of like subby information to it, and then just cleaning up this whole sort of area here. So yeah, then that's going into X50 with the cab. I'll turn the cabs on so you're listening to awful noise. So I'll turn. This is just where it's at now with the tone. So it's pretty much there. Yeah, this is just what I decided works for this in particular. It's sort of a preset I have built for like my writing sessions. So, I just sort of gravitate towards this, and I re-EQ the guitar based on whatever guitar I'm using. But this stuff doesn't tend to change during my writing sessions and stuff. I just usually just run with what this is. So I'll turn this section on and off. You can hear what it's sort of doing to the tone. Sort of rolling off some of that subby information and not blowing out the amp, because obviously we added a lot in this EQ section, like 10 dB almost. This sort of rolls that off and evens out the whole mid-range. Yeah, I'm not really doing anything in this power cab section. I don't think it really makes a huge difference overall. And then into GGD cabs, just using this massive one. Like, I just sort of use these descriptors to, sort of craft the tone I'm looking for, because they pretty much do what they say. So I'll just solo through each individual one and then add, play it all together, and you can hear what they're all doing. So this Catharsis one is sort of, it's where the whole tone sort of anchors from. A lot of like low end in this, but I feel like the mid range is lacking a little bit, so this sort of fills those gaps. Yeah, and then the post EQ. So I'm like boosting the low end for the non-palm mutes, and then there's a dynamic, band on it, pulling it back down on the palm mutes. So you'll be able to see that. You can really see it pull it down while those palm mutes come through, because they just like pump through it around this range here. So that just keeps that in check, and like, so it doesn't get overbearing in the overall mix. I'll turn this on and off. So then I just got a little bit of a mid scoop, just at this like 400 hertz area, just pulling out this like boxiness that sort of comes from like a 5150 tone. And just this little dip here that I must have felt was like a ringy frequency somewhere. And just a high cut. Just rolling off some fizziness. And that's pretty much the tone. A lot of the low end really comes from the bass sort of being backed up with the guitar. Like, there's not a whole lot sort of happening under 120 for the guitars, so like the bass is sort of fitting in around that area and filling out that like low space. Like the tone sounds pretty thin on its own without that bass really being in there to back it up. So I'll play it in context with this pre-EQ section turned off, and you'll really hear what this is doing, because this is sort of like the biggest tone shaping part of my tones. Yeah, you'll hear it when I play. It just cleans up all that mid mud that is like really built up here. So like if I boost this while it's playing, you'll really hear what's going on. Yeah, so that's like such a huge part. Honestly, you could get away with not doing either of these bit boosts, and this section would make more of a difference than what these two are actually doing. It's just that this just really cleans up the entire tone, and just stops the amp from blowing out in that mid range. So yeah, so that's my approach for doing the P90s. I wasn't boosting too much of the high end as much as I would in like a humbucker, because like I feel like a lot of it is already sort of in there. The pickup's pretty spanky. So yeah, I don't really have to do a whole lot there. But on this other session with the video, like my most recent video, I was using my custom baritone, which has M7s in it, and there's a little bit more going on in the pre-EQ section to sort of like tame and push where I feel like the tone needs to fit. So I'll play this little passage here. So I'll play the DI for this. You'll hear how like this is literally straight out of my writing session, so you can see how choppy it is as I've like constructed this riff bit by bit. And you'll hear it in the DI how like choppy it really is, because like the distortion really covers a lot of that. Yeah, so this is what the pickups sound like in my M7, just straight into the computer basically. So it is also going through Digitech Whammy, pitching from drop F down to drop E. So it's only going down a semitone, but you can hear a lot of that artifacting happening within the recording, just because that's sort of how the whammy sounds. But like, I don't think it's such a huge deal, honestly. It doesn't really come through when all the distortion is happening. So putting everything back on. That's sort of the tone for this one. This area gets a little bit fizzy, hectically fizzy, so like I tend to pull that out. Very similar approach with the mids here. I just like to boost like 1.5k because that's where I find the Jun sort of sound is sitting in these pickups in particular. So I really like to accentuate that. Same thing with the low boost, just for sustain. It doesn't really do a whole lot, as drastic as it looks. Like, a lot of it sort of ends up getting rolled off by this. I'm pushing into the amp pretty hard too. I just feel like it just pushes the amp in a nice way. I even apply this very similar method to like using real amps as well. I think this is it's pretty much exactly the same cab setup on this, and probably the same. Yeah, it's like I said, it's literally from my writing template. It's just this stuff gets sort of reapproached per guitar because each guitar sounds different, each pickup sounds different. So I sort of even tuning, like the mid range dip will be in a slightly different range. If it was tuned to say drop B, it's going to be a little bit higher up or a little bit lower down. Sort of just adjusting to whatever you're using and whatever tuning you're in and just stuff like that. But like the overall processing is pretty straightforward based on just like how guitar tones work. Yeah, but like a lot of the low end really comes from bass. So this one is MIDI bass, so I'm using Umansky bass for all this stuff. The other one was real bass that I tracked with my Dingwall. Very similar approach actually for doing bass. Just sort of, I like to really push the high end on the bass to get that like clankiness. I like to use Hellraiser. I know a lot of people use Neural DSP and the Dark Glass and what's that one called? Parallax. But this has just worked for my sounds, and just I like the way the gain staging and distortion works for bass. I just don't use the cab section at all. I just fully turn it off and just let the high end come through, and then I sort of tame it in the post EQ, and then double tap to sort of compress the whole tone, and that's like my bass tones in a nutshell. Nothing too crazy there, or maybe it is crazy and I'm just in my own world here. Yeah, that's sort of my approach to everything. Not really going to go over any like ambient stuff or drum tones. That's a very complicated process that I do for my bullshit for whatever reason. All of that human playthrough was all stems from our single, so I didn't mix anything for that. I literally just pulled the stems in. So yeah, all of this stuff was just the stuff we sent off to get masters. So anytime I have to work on Observer music that's post-release, I just use stems. I don't bother trying to remix things because it can become a nightmare sometimes. Yeah, and then this is the original guitar. This is the original guitar tone from the actual release, and this was all tracked on humbuckers, so there's a bit of a difference here. This was tracked through. This was all through real amps with a 5150 and like a Mesa cab, the classic combo, to sort of get this tone. Obviously, very, very different sort of sounds. I applied pretty much the same process to doing like real amped guitar tones to what I did for this stuff. Just, I probably used some hardware pedals for the overdrives and stuff instead of plugins, but I definitely would have used ProQ going out of the computer back into a real amp and crafting the tone with EQ section there. So yeah, cool. I hope this was somewhat helpful. I had a fair few questions about this. This is just my approach to doing things. This is what works for me. Might not work for you. Give it a go. EQ your DIs. See what happens. Hopefully, you make some sick guitar tones. Thanks, guys.